Then they'll know. Well, it's my disability.
Okay, Mick Cole, and you can call me he, whatever. You can actually call me just about anything because my hearing's so bad I probably won't use it anyway. So it's hard to insult me. I was Air Force from 1963 to 1970, and first arrived in Vietnam on 1 February 1965. Flew my last combat mission in December of 1969 and was either on the ground or in the air every year in between.
Thank you.
The last few months, I was in the Air Force. I was on the middle ward. What we now know was combat PTSD. Fortunately, around 2005, some of my friends back in Rochester, New York, finally convinced me to go to the VA. Now, when I was discharged from the Air Force 2 years early, one of the papers they had me sign was one that said I had been advised to go to the VA for treatment, but refused, because at that point I wanted nothing to do with anything associated with the military. I've been in group therapy since about 2005, and I still struggle. But in addition to combat PTSD, I do have several other service-connected issues, one of which is the hearing. And unlike most people who get 0% in hearing aids for hearing, I'm 30% service-connected, which gives you some idea how bad the hearing is as a result of too many hours in the air flying combat missions. The weekly group therapy does help, but as you can see, I still struggle. And I have also had some experience with the privatization. A couple of years ago, I was out in Arizona doing some motorcycle therapy in the dirt and came home on crutches. Well, because the local facility cannot do MRIs, they had to refer me to a private provider. And the contract company that was doing the scheduling gave me a very hard time, resulting in probably at least a 2-month delay in being seen.
HealthNet.
Because,
HealthNet.
yeah.
Yeah.
And other guys in my group have also had problems with the contract scheduler, both previous and the current one. They've also been billed, even though they had the paperwork when they went into the office saying this is a referral from the VA. Privatization is not working. The guys I know who are referred to private providers, usually it takes longer for them to see the private provider than it would to see somebody in the VA. And to me, the problems with the VA are not the horror stories you read about in the newspapers, which are designed to help them destroy the VA. The problems are a lack of funding, a lack of staffing. In Rochester, we've had several people leave and not be replaced. As a result, when I go in for my annual physical, I'm seen not by a MD, but by a physician's assistant. When it's time renew my prescriptions for my mental issues, I have to see whichever doctor is available, because the last 3 doctors I've had have all left, and the last one has not been replaced, which means there's no continuity. Part of the problem, of course, and you're probably familiar with this, is the rigorous, they call it rigorous, the ordeal anybody who wants to work for the VA has to go through before they can be hired.
Cool.
Huh?
Yep.
Which means that by the time they get hired, they've probably gone to work somewhere else. In fact, at one time, back in 1982, before I moved from Tacoma, Washington to Rochester, New York, I was offered a job as a staff attorney with the VA, which I turned down because I'd already accepted a job in Rochester, because it took them so long to come to a decision. I actually could have been working as a staff attorney instead of as a legal editor with a private publisher. And as I said, I'm originally from the West Coast, and even though I've been in New York since 1982, I'm still trying to get adjusted. I sometimes think the government in New York is more akin to a feudal state than to a modern democracy. I am married. Somehow I have a wife who's put up with me for, well, this year will be 40 years now. And I also have 3 grown children. And, well, my daughter is also something of an activist. Those of you from New York City may be familiar with the Spectre pipeline. She was one of the Spectre 6 who were arrested for chaining themselves to the machinery one day.
Well, I'm John Tetwig, originally from Rochester, New York area. And boy, that's a long, long story. I'll try and keep it short. It was inevitable I would be drafted. Being not the smartest, I beat the draft by enlisting and took on an extra year. I was in Vietnam from September 67 till September 68. When it was time to get out of Vietnam, I thought there was a civil war going on back here in the States, and I was wearing the wrong uniform. I didn't want to stand on the steps of the Pentagon and hold a rifle with a bayonet against peace protesters. So I discovered I could volunteer for a transfer to Thailand, R&R Center, and avoid all of that, which I did. It was the best decision I ever made. As another Southeast Asian Oriental country, they were ostensibly on our side, and I discovered I could go downtown and not be threatened, and I became very deep into Thai culture and ate their food and wore their clothes and walked out into the country forever and a day and picked rice and the whole thing. And the time came, I had to get out of the Army and come home. And I went back on the Army post and ate their food and got typhoid fever. But other than that, came home in 1969, wanted nothing to do with the VA or the US government or any of it. And found a career and did well and found a wife. There's a story behind that. But anyway, in September, we've been married 50 years. My wife was a labor and delivery OB/GYN nurse and wanted a baby of her own worse than anything in the world. And I wasn't very eager to bring children into the world, but it happened. And we had a little son, and I was as pleased as anybody could possibly be. And at the age of 14 days, my wife found him dead in the crib with birth defects that had not popped up anywhere in either of our families. I think it was my exposure to Agent Orange, but the elected coroner in South Carolina said it was SIDS, so that's what's on the paperwork and whatever. 1982, I was watching television on Saturday night, and in those days you turned the dial, and I turned the dial and I ran into the CBS documentary about how General Westmoreland lied about the number of enemy troops that were out there with their guns aimed at us, because I was there at that time. And it became very obvious. I should go back and say, I put Vietnam on a shelf and said, that's the past, I've got to have a future, I got a wife and a family, and I've got to build a career, and that's like kindergarten or Boy Scouts or all that stuff that happened in the past. Well, my box fell off the shelf and splattered all over. And there came a day, and I'd never written more than a letter or a high school term paper in my life, but I went out on the back porch. My wife discovered books about Vietnam, and she was laying on the couch going, oh my God, and I said, yeah, what did you think it was, you know? And, but I read all the books, and we went down to the mall, and I said, what have you got in the way of books about Vietnam? And they had a shelf like that, and I came out with 2 shopping bags full, went home and read them all. And they weren't what I wanted my kids to know. They were not wrong, but so one day I went out on the back porch with a yellow legal pad and a pen and started taking notes of what I wanted my kids to know. And then we had a little manual typewriter, and I started typing. This finger types and this one makes capitals. And for 9 months, every night she'd get the kids to bed, and I would turn on the old 60s music and go back and try to remember what happened and put it into some kind of sensible shape and whatever. And anyway, long story short, through an absolutely unbelievable set of circumstances, that pile of papers became a book. It came out in 1985, 35 years and 27 printings later, it's still on most bookstore shelves.
A classic. No, it's a classic for anybody who reads Vietnam literature. His book is one
Name of the book.
that era.
And a hard-green film.
It's
Postcards on the shelf.
What fits in with the rank and file kind of writing about their experience in the war is a classic of that
What's it
genre.
called?
Hard Rain Fell.
And a hard-green film.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Hard Rain Fell.
Bob Dylan on A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and A Hard Rain Fell.
Did I get this right? I don't hear.
Anyway, I had a very successful career. We had 2 daughters who had been relatively healthy. I had no idea of Agent Orange at the time. A lot of things happened. And 2011, my employer and I agreed to disagree about some things, and I was 62 years old, and the kids 30 years old couldn't find a job. And it suddenly dawned on me, oh shit, I'm retired. And I had no medical insurance or anything like that, and my wife had been after me for 42 years. You should go to the VA. So I did, and they've treated me fairly well. I had in hospital in Salem, Virginia, I had a carpal tunnel operation, I had a rotator cuff operation. It went great, perfect, couldn't have been better. I also had a lower back problem that had finally gotten really serious 2015. And I went to the VA, and the VA said, we don't have anybody that can fix that kind of thing. You have to go to the choice program, which was administered at the time by a company called HealthNet. My fine Virginia congressman let me know that he was very proud that he had hired a Northern Virginia company to administer claims like this with the VA. Except they didn't. They kept half the money for themselves. They didn't pay doctors, on and on and on. It was a disaster. I had both of my senators and my congressmen. Finally, I got approval to have the operation I needed in a civilian hospital outside the VA. Had the operation. Geez, I felt great for about a month. And then I started, this was operation on my spine, and I started to have pain, and then I started to have a whole lot of pain, and my wife rushed me to the emergency room, and they discovered I had a major infection in my spine. So they did another operation, and they couldn't stop the infection, and they told my wife, April 11th, 2016, told my wife, say goodbye tonight. He probably won't be here tomorrow morning. And I fooled them.
Yeah. Obviously.
I will tell you that the HealthNet Choice operation had agreed to fund that operation. The other two operations and about 10 months that I spent in the hospital and all of the, they wouldn't mix the antibiotic that finally worked until I was in the room with the thing in my arm all ready to go because it was so expensive. But anyway, they finally cured it. Knock on wood, I hope it's for good. But HealthNet, the VA, refused to pay anything but for the original operation. And thank God I had Medicare and a Medicare supplement that picked up the rest. But that's my experience with privatizing the VA, and they have a different name for it now, not the choice program anymore. I don't even know.
Mission Act.
The Mission Act, okay.
Community care.
If it works the way the choice program works, tell me. The other thing I'll tell you is over 35 years of going out and visiting high schools and colleges and all that, I've been asked a lot of questions. I felt like we needed to tell the real truth of what happened, and that's why 34 years later published a book in June called Vietnam Reconsidered, the War, the Times, and Why They Matter. There's postcards over there. You can get it anywhere. Every Barnes and Noble's got a bunch of them. I wish they'd sell them quick.
Books, what's that?
And it could not be published by a mainstream publisher because they said it was too controversial. But I think people in this room would find it very, very interesting. So, sorry to take so long. Why did I come here? Every Thursday morning I go to a PTSD group with about 30 guys around the table like this. And in Lynchburg, Virginia, within a mile of Liberty University, but that is neither here nor there. And they have some rather unusual ideas. And AR-15s to sell their ideas with. But every one of them, every damn one, says do not privatize the VA. And I'm hoping to come home with some material that I can run through the copier and go in and say, hey guys, you know what? Here are the facts, here's what you need to do. I'm meeting with our far-right congressman on Tuesday, but he's an Iraq war vet. You know, let's rent a bus and all go see Denver Riggleman and, you know, take another try at it. But some way I'd like to be effective in stopping the insanity that's going on in this city. I really am hesitant to drink the water here, I have to tell you. Anyway,
Well, last thing.
From Minneapolis, Minnesota, chapter 27, West for Peace. Male pronouns. I was in Vietnam. I was in the Marine Corps from 68 to 70. In Vietnam, 68, 69. Marine radio operator. Air Naval gunfire, and then for a period of time on fighter base. I was fortunate that I didn't get killed, and that was great. Good to be back. But like so many of us, when we got back, you know, I just sort of packed it away. And I should back up a little bit. I went in the Marine Corps because my older brother, 10 years older, had been in the Marine Reserves. And so, of course, he was my older brother, and so I was influenced. Plus, I grew up in a family that was incredibly bigoted and racist and patriotic. And so, you know, I thought that was they usually go together.
Yeah,
you know? Yeah, you're right, Maurice. And so that pushed me, you know, easily, got me ready, I should say, to enlist. I call myself today a recovering racist because that, in fact, is the truth. When I came back from Vietnam, I just couldn't stand spit and polish. I was in D.C. Here at Quantico, and I was going to be training officers for working in the field and so forth, and decided, no, this is not for me. And what now we're talking a 19-year-old kid, right? So you got to remember the naivety. And I said, I don't want to be here. I want to go back. Second tour. But I want to go back and I want to build villages, not destroy them. Well, of course, you know, what is my master sergeant going to say? Well, of course you can. And so I was set up for another tour, and I came out to Pendleton, and when I got to Pendleton, they said, you know, here you are, great, you're assigned to Force Recon behind enemy lines. I said, no, wait a minute, that's not at all what I signed up for. And they said, shut your mouth, and I head over there to the barracks. At that point, I realized I'd had it. And so I turned against the war, and I started organizing one of the GI movements on base in Oceanside, California. The Green Machine Coffee House, and so on and so forth. The one that got shot up by right-wing terrorists at one point. And I started, that's when my organizing years started. I've been organizing for about 50 years now, really, in one way or another. So I started there and brought newspapers, literature on into the barracks, and eventually, of course, you know, being young, being inexperienced, I got caught. Someone turned me in, And when they turned me in, they set me up for court-martial and put me in a holding company, but I continued to go off base. Somehow, they never quite understood that. So I went off base and I continued to organize and what have you. Well, it got to the point where they just couldn't handle it anymore, and they decided to kick me out instead of court-martial, which was fine with me. I had no problem with that at all. But I think they were caught between a rock and a hard spot because I served honorably in Vietnam, but then turned against the war, so they didn't know what to do. So they kicked me out, but with an honorable discharge, which was, that's where I had them between a rock and a hard spot. I didn't even know it. I didn't care. When I got out, I said, I don't care. I took my uniforms and I didn't burn them, could have, but I threw them in the trash. And then went home.
Me too.
And so, but then, you know, I didn't want to talk about the war after that. And so it took a long time till I got involved. I didn't sign up for VA until last year. And that's, you know, part of that whole thing. So I'm married, wonderful woman, 30 years. And she and I had been doing anti-war work once I got out of the service 50 years ago, and then we met. And so, you know, organizing does bring other benefits, you know, bringing happiness in life. And so anyway, why I'm here, because Arliss and I are heading up a SOVA action committee in Minneapolis. We took over from Dave Cooley, who needed to step back, and I'm glad he did. And so we have, every month we have Save Our VA protests, or not protests, informational picketing on the bridge by the Minneapolis VA. Can't be on their property because we'd get kicked off. But we are on the bridge, and we've had 10 of them now, and we just had one, what was the date, 5th or something like that? And it was damn cold, you know? But we do it anyway, and we have people who are either veterans, or we have people from Healthcare for All Minnesota, or physicians for the National Healthcare System. We have some other veterans from other unions, and it works. And so I came here, one, because I wanted to meet a bunch of people who I had heard of or been in communication with, and I also want to help organize a national effort so that we get more disciplined, more focused, so that we go back to where we come from, and we can be more effective. Yeah, that's it. That's enough.
My name is Arliss Harum. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and I'm now living in Minneapolis. I was a student nurse, 66 to 70, and then in the Army Nurse Corps after that, in Vietnam in 72. My parents were both World War II vets. They both got their health care at the VA. It's just sort of how things were. I was living in Cambodia for the last 25 years, and the only way I could really get medical care was through the VA, since I met the income criteria. Have not had any disabilities or real health problems, but could get my care anyway, had more health care. What you were saying about community early, I think is really important, and I think it's on both sides. For me, it's one of the most significant things about going to the VA is it is a community, and the staff too. And I suspect a lot of staff feel good working in a place where there is a sense of community, and not being driven that you've got to be in and out of there in 5 minutes or whatever, but that you know something about your patients, and you see your patients over again. I suspect it means a lot to staff as well. I've been very happy with my care at the VA, and then here with Jeff, like I said, we're doing the SOVA committee, and I want to learn how to lobby better, and look at, how can we mobilize this group that's already interested, but also maybe, are there ways that we can also reach other VA groups, maybe, that's for peace groups across the country also, to maybe start doing something. I keep saying, is there anybody in Illinois? They have Tammy Duckworth, they have a nurse, that's really active, and some others, so I don't know. And so that's a part of what I'd like to find out too, is do we have any way to expand who we are as well within Nuts for Peace?
Okay, let me just, Michael just laughed at people that he had to catch a subway or a train, I'm not sure what actually he caught, but Metro, or whatever, so he had to leave for that. Also, somebody else, Ellen Barfield, had to leave earlier for the same reason. She's in Baltimore, so both of them will be back and apologize, but they had to catch a train, so they'll be back in the morning and full of energy.
Well, Michael's the reason I'm in.
Kevin Berry, St. Louis, Missouri. But I worked in Oceanside for 18 years.
Did you?
Yeah. Army, 70-71 Army. I did not go to Vietnam. I was in Okinawa. And it was probably R&R for 18 months compared to, it was one of the easiest times of my life, embarrassed to say now. I've been, ever since I got out of the Army, I've been protesting something. I mean, most of it was environmental for 30-something years, but I kind of got into the peace movement and anti-war about 5 or 7 years ago when I was living in San Diego. I've done a lot of protests. I did a 65-mile peace walk by Creech Air Force Base. I've gone to Fort Huachuca, protested torture. I've been to Los Alamos numerous times for August 6th, August 9th. And the reason I'm here today because of this is I don't use the VA benefits. I've been fortunate to have good health benefits like this man has. I haven't needed it, but I've been in a VA hospital and it's a different atmosphere than you go into a hospital. You better be dying or you got a card or it's very corporate now. It's really changed over the past 20, 30 years. And the VA has felt way more friendly. The times I went in there, I went, wow, this is pretty nice. It's not like walking into a corporate hospital. So, and I joined Veterans for Peace a while back, and I try to wear stuff, and I get good response from a lot of people. Obviously, well, that's great, but I think people are wire weary, really do. So I hope that they don't destroy what's going on with the VA hospital. They try to destroy everything, but they see a way to make some money, just grab it and choke it to death like they do everything. So I hope this works. So.
Yeah, my name's John Spitzberg from Willow, Alaska, and we've gone a long time. So let me be quickly. I'll speak fast. I joined the Army in 1958, so I'm a little.